I think praise the Lord. Let's give Sister Sybil, hello. Brother Darren, hello. Okay, I think, okay, Brother Eugene is here. All right, let's get started. Let me just get this light a bit closer. Okay. Brother Aaron is joined. Okay, let's get started. Of course, this entire series about the Bible and science, and this particular session is on Bible and the creation of the universe. Like we said, in the book of Genesis, there is in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth account, and there are a few more details also about a few constellations and so on in scriptures. Now, in terms of opposing worldviews, you have the Christian worldview with a creator God who created the universe at a certain point in time, about less than 10,000 years before now, versus attempts to get to a naturalistic explanation of the existence of the universe. So those are the two worldviews, two different worldviews contending, major worldviews contending against each other. The major theory that is being advanced from the naturalistic worldview currently is, of course, the Big Bang. And so we'd mainly focus on Big Bang versus the biblical model. Like I said, we're not going to do much polemics today. Polemics ought to be reserved for a later series of material that God's strengthening will bring out. Right now, it's more apologetics. And so the first thing we are really going to approach and deal with is in terms of saying whether this universe can be explained naturalistically, or do we necessarily expect to have a creator God? And we are going to conclude that there ought to be a God who created this universe. That's the first area we're going to address. This universe has been created by God. And once we establish that, we then could go on to talk about how old this universe could be and so on. And there, we'd essentially say, whatever God says as to when He created the universe, we should take that seriously. In other words, we first determine that there exists God, and then we say the timeline he gives is our sacrosanct timeline. All right, okay. So first, in terms of establishing whether there is a God. Now, before we get on to that, we need to really prepare a list of our scientific observations. In terms of scientific observations, we have a list of observations that we know about the universe in a reasonably conclusive manner. I've given in the book, The Old World, I've given some of these conclusions in chapter 2. Cosmic microwave background radiation, evidence for an expanding universe in the fact of redshifts being displayed by galaxies. A uniform temperature in the universe, wherever we measure temperature in any observable part of the universe, the temperature of that part seems to be the same as the temperature that we observe from some other part of the universe. So there seems to be a uniform spread, a uniform temperature across the universe. There are, of course, black holes and dark energy and dark matter. So two important things: cosmic microwave background radiation and redshifts displayed by distant galaxies. Those are two things we'll be using in our attempt to explain that there ought to be a God who created this universe. Okay, so for that, I think I have passed on, apart from the old world manuscript or the soft copy, I've passed on another handout which with the title Cases for the Existence of God, and that is what I'm going to use right now. There are a few philosophical arguments that could be advanced, which could help us arrive at the conclusion that given the universe we do have right now, there ought to be a God. There is no other way around it. God is a necessity. As a matter of a philosophical conclusion, sometimes using scientific observations also. So there are a few different arguments advanced, and we're just going to mainly focus on the prominent argument which people might be familiar with, which is advanced by William Lane Craig mainly. It's called Kalam cosmological argument. Now, William Lane Craig, who is a renowned apologist himself, presents a philosopher, a world-renowned one, who is still, of course, actively ministering in that way. Now, he picks up on that, and he really uses that in a very good way. I have a few modifications to what he has, a few comments which I'll make, but that's one argument, Kalam cosmological argument. The next one, and then there are a few more arguments, like argument from contingency, ontological argument, and teleological argument, and so on. A few different ways in which we can establish that the universe has to have a creator. Our main focus right now would be on Kalam cosmological argument. So let me share that with you right now on the screen, and we can take that forward. Okay, share screen, share. Kalam cosmological argument. Okay, Kalam cosmological argument. This was first advanced by a person called Al-Ghazali, and he has this particular formulation. You don't have to worry about whether you are familiar with philosophical arguments, phrasing of arguments philosophically. I just make this a simple English language based sort of formulation. Whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its beginning. Is Al-Ghazali's formulation. Whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its beginning. Now, William Lane Craig tightens this argument by tightening the first part here. Instead of saying whatever begins to exist, he really brings in the universe itself, and he says, if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause of its beginning. If only we can establish that the universe actually began to exist, then we can actually say, the first statement is an if condition. If we can establish that it began to exist, i.e. it didn't exist until some time, it didn't exist at it began to exist at a particular point in time, prior to which it wasn't there, then we should then talk about the cause for its beginning. And then he goes on to say, we can establish that the universe began to exist. So the premise is the universe began to exist. If the universe began to exist, there must be a cause. But we do know that the universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause for its beginning. That's how the argument is formulated. The universe has a cause for its beginning. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause for its beginning. Now, in terms of as you can see, these three statements are given in three separate lines, numbered 1, 2, and 3. The first two, essentially the way in which the argument is formulated is, if 1 and 2 are true, then 3 necessarily is true. If 1 and 2 are true, then automatically the implication is number 3 is true. Okay, now we're going to go through this one line at a time. And firstly, we are going to say line 1 is true. The universe began, if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause for its beginning. That's line number 1. And what are the other alternatives? If the universe began to exist, there was no cause for its beginning, is the alternative. And there the point is, if the universe began to exist, there must be a cause. There would be a cause. Universe would have a cause for its beginning, is what we are going to support. And support from premise 1, i.e. the first line, actually comes in 3 different ways, all 3 equally valid. First thing is, we can say, well, nothing comes, a particular thing, anything doesn't come from nothing. Nothing leads to nothing. In other words, something cannot come from nothing. For example, if I have a box and inside of the box there is nothing, even after 10 days, if I go look at it, there won't be anything. You won't expect to find anything. And of course, in our boxes, we might expect to find maybe some dirt or whatever. That's purely because there is external influence. But if there is no external influence, and if a box is sealed, secured, and there was nothing in the box beforehand, and even if you leave that for 10 years and open it, there won't be anything if you seal it properly inside it even after. Because nothing does not produce anything. Nothing does not produce anything. In other words, something cannot come from nothing. So, if the universe came to existence, it must have come from some reason. It can't just pop out with no reason. It came because there was some reason for it to come. Okay, there was some underlying, some other object or entity that led to its existence. Second way of saying the same thing. Some of these might look as if they are saying the same thing, but they are subtly different. And so even if you're confident with one of these, you have really proven statement one. And the second way of arguing for it is by saying, if something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything or everything doesn't come into being from nothing. These are, by the way, William Lane Craig's formulation. So these are not my original ones. These are borrowed from William Lane Craig. So point number 2 is, if something can come into being from nothing, then we really can't explain why anything and everything is not popping out into existence from nothing. If something can come from nothing, then there is no reason why there is no Santa Claus here, there is no Bugs Bunny here, we would expect to find, because, well, we can expect to find something pop into existence from nothing. And so when we don't find something popping into existence from nothing, in where we are, in our room, in our wherever, when we don't find these, we really can go back to saying something cannot come from nothing. This is another way of looking at the same fact. If something can come from nothing, then there is no reason why anything and everything isn't popping into existence from nothing. Third, common experience and scientific evidence confirm the truth of premise 1. Science tells us, common experience tells us, if there was nothing there before, there won't be anything after also, as long as you have a sealed environment. Of course, if you have microbes, then they could influence and so on. As long as nothing is there, absolutely nothing, even if you leave that for 100 years, it'll still be the same nothing. You won't expect to find a Bugs Bunny there or whatever. So the first point is, if the universe began to exist, the universe should have a cause. So that's true. We understand that must be true. If it began to exist, there must have been a reason. There must have been a cause for its existence. Point number 1 is true. Let's look at point number 2. The universe began to exist. And here is where scientific observations really help, and some of the philosophical arguments also. The question that we really are asking is, did the universe come into existence? Because the first line is an if condition. If it is true, then it is true. If the universe came into existence, then it must have a reason. Now, if only we can say, yes, indeed, the universe came into existence, then we can automatically say, then of course, there must be a reason for its beginning. We can conclude that. That is point number 3. If indeed it came to existence. In other words, the if condition, whatever was the thing which is proposed as an if condition was true. That is true, then the implication would be automatically valid. The universe began to exist. There are a few different ways of establishing this. A couple of philosophical arguments and a couple of scientific arguments for the fact of the universe coming into universe beginning to exist. The point is, once we go through these arguments, they are really saying line number 2 is true. The universe in fact began to exist. That's what they're going to argue for, because once that's done, essentially then automatically 3 would be true. The universe has a cause for its beginning. We need to then just label that cause, find out what that cause is. But you can never say the universe randomly came into existence. It has to have a cause. Okay, how do we establish that 2 is true? Universe began to exist. There are a few different ways, like I said, 2 philosophical ways and 2 scientific ways. 2 philosophical arguments. Philosophical argument number 1. Al-Ghazali says, actual infinities could not exist. Why is he talking about infinity? Essentially, if we said the universe did not come into existence, we are really saying it was infinitely there. It was always there. It was always around. And his argument is actual infinities could not exist. There is no way in which an actual infinity could exist. William Lane Craig essentially says that Al-Ghazali's first argument is a good one. In other words, he confirms that and says actual infinities cannot exist. I'd like to bring in a minor tweak to that. I don't think that's entirely accurate to say actual infinities cannot exist by the very fact that God is an infinity. God is an infinity. So what I'm going to say is this, which I think is the accurate way of putting this. I am going to say actual infinities could not exist within the dimensions available in our universe. Within the space-time continuum and the rest of the dimensions that we are aware of, which make up the universe, within these dimensions, actual infinities cannot exist. In other words, I'm not saying actual infinities could not exist. I think actual infinities could exist. But if it did exist, actual infinity, which I think is the case, God is an infinity, actual infinity does exist. But when it does exist, it breaches the dimensions that we are aware of. Only when it breaches, it can really exist. Within the space, within the dimensions available within the universe, including even the boundary of the universe, actual infinities could not exist. There are a few different ways in which William Lane Craig argues for this. Essentially, this involves this involves some knowledge of how infinities work, and arguments how infinity is viewed and so on. So essentially, I mean, a simple way of saying this is an example. In infinity is large number above which there is no number, but it's seen as a real number roughly, but bear in mind in mathematically speaking, infinity is a complex notion. People say there are different kinds of infinities and try to give examples for different kinds. So it's a complex area, and for me to have any watertight way of talking about it, I need hours to do that. But we of course we are doing a short presentation now, so it won't be watertight in the way I use phrases and terms. But let me put it this way. Assume for a moment that a hotel has infinite rooms. Of course, there's no such hotel in the entire world, but let's pretend, just for discussion's sake, there are infinite rooms in that hotel. So the infinite rooms, and therefore infinite rooms. Now infinite people come to occupy the infinite rooms. Bear in mind, infinity is actually real, and therefore this could happen in theory. Infinite people to come to occupy infinite rooms. So they have occupied all rooms, it's all full. But the very definition of infinity means it's a number which is greater than any other number. So when you say there are infinite rooms, you should always allow the fact of saying it's more than what any number could satisfy. So when you say I have infinite rooms, I should be able to say I can always have more rooms than the number of people who come to take up those rooms. So infinite people have come to occupy infinite rooms. The hotel is full, but that does not mean that contradicts the fact that the hotel has infinite rooms, because if I claim it has infinite rooms, I should always have spare rooms. There's no state at which I can say the rooms have been filled. Again, if it seems like a bit confusing, please bear with me, because the confusions or the complexity in relation to this area corresponds to the fact that infinity is a hard area to talk about even. Essentially, what we have done in this cheekily is that we have used one infinity to make another infinity be completely taken up, and therefore say, because you've completely taken up, you're not infinity, you haven't got more. That's the challenge. In other words, it's pretty much like that hotel has a board at its doorway saying no vacancy, because infinite people have taken up, but guests are welcome because I've got infinite rooms. Now that's absurdity. If there's no vacancy, no guests can come. That's an absurd proposition. This is just a comical way of saying such a notion called a true infinity could not exist. True infinity could not exist, is what William Lane Craig is saying. So he's using that to really say an actual infinity cannot exist. Infinite temporal regress of events is an actual infinity. Therefore, an infinite temporal regress of events cannot exist. What these three statements really mean are, so if you consider that the universe has been around for infinite period of time, never had a beginning, always existed, then you can always go back 1 second at a time or 1 microsecond at a time backward. So you'll be able to trace through infinite such microseconds or milliseconds, or whichever granularity you deal with. You can always go through infinite number of such points, which means essentially what you're saying is, if you're talking about a beginningless universe, that beginningless universe in itself, at least along time dimension, is infinity. But they've just made the argument that philosophically speaking, no such infinities could exist, and therefore this beginningless universe is just an absurdity. Actual infinities could not exist. Time without a beginning is an actual infinity, and therefore to say universe had no beginning is absurd. That's one way of arguing for it. Like I said, I want to really point this out. Actual infinities could not exist merely within the dimensions in this universe. I think that qualification is very, very important, without which we will trip on our next stage, which of course no one has challenged William Lane Craig on so far. But that's one way in which his formulation could be challenged. Actual infinities could not exist within the dimensions available. Second philosophical argument is very similar. When I say, I mean, it's really using the fundamental argumentation in a few different ways. The second way is no series which is formed by adding one member after another can be an actual infinity. What does that mean? It means if there is any dimension in which you can talk about one point, and then after that another point, after that another point, after, for example, time. This is 5 o'clock. If you take time dimension, this is 5 p.m. and 1 minute later is 5:01 p.m. and 5:02 p.m. So as long as there is a linear arrangement of points one after another, when any dimension involves such arrangements of things one after another, along those dimensions, you simply cannot have infinity. That's the argument. And that's what he means. No series meaning a sequence of things. Series. In mathematics, it's called series. I mean, of course, you'd be familiar with the idea of series, a movie series, sequence, sequel. Part 1, part 2, Matrix 1, Matrix 2. I don't know if Matrix has sequels, but James Bond 1, 2, 3. If there's any series which is formed by adding one member after another, if there is any idea called after, which is one after another, which is a linear arrangement, then along for a particular dimension, then along that dimension you can't have infinity. William Lane Craig goes on to give some examples. I mean, using this, I mean, there are a few different ways of saying the same thing. But for example, Jupiter and Saturn, or two different planets revolving around the sun at two different rates. The point is, if they were revolving around the sun at two different rates, But if we have had infinite period of time already, because the universe always existed, then has, I can't remember which one goes faster than which one, I can't remember, apologies, but one of them goes faster than the other in terms of rotation, revolution around the sun. Then the point is, if there had been an actual infinity in that universe, then of course none of them had gone around the sun more than the other, because both have gone around the sun in infinite times. But that's an absurdity. You can't have that. If you have the speed of or the time taken by Jupiter to revolve around the universe, around the sun, is different from the time taken for Saturn to revolve around the sun, and they can be plotted in a dimension where we say time taken or speed, one after another, where there is a sequence, one is greater than the other. As long as you can plot such a graph, which you can, because we observe that they are revolving around the sun at two different rates, and we can plot the graph. But the thing is, once you have that, then you can clearly say to say that one is going around the sun faster than the other would be absurdity, because if there had been infinite time, because if there had been infinite time, both would have gone around infinite number of times. That's equal number of times. So anyway, that's the second philosophical argument. A few different ways, few different interesting examples provided by in terms of few different application areas. Based on that, people can say a collection formed by successive addition. Essentially, these are just saying, well, I've given an example, and based on the example, I can say universe hasn't been there for ever. In terms of scientific observation, there are again two scientific observations presented. The first one corresponds to what I have given in the book. The redshift that we have essentially implies that all of the galaxies are moving away from us, away from the Earth, away from the Milky Way galaxy, away from the solar system, and so on. All of them are moving away. So, which clearly means all of them, the universe as a whole is expanding. That's point number one. The universe is expanding. And then point number two is the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is supposed to be a prediction for, they say normally prediction for Big Bang. I disagree. The point is, it's a prediction for an inflationary model for cosmos. i.e., when things sort of explode, you expect to find these sorts of radiations. If the universe had exploded, you'd expect to find these radiations. I believe in the fact that the universe is expanding, exploding and expanding, but I don't believe in a Big Bang without God at the point where they think it happened from a black hole. I rather think God created and then things expand. Now, the simple point is this: without even talking about God yet, we can clearly say that the universe had a beginning, and then since then it had exploded and expanded because of the scientific observations that we have in the form of both the cosmic microwave background radiation and the fact of the redshifts exhibited by galaxies, distant galaxies, galaxies which are distant from our Earth. So these are scientific confirmation to really say that we are expanding. Given that we are expanding, we had a beginning point, because if we didn't have a beginning point, we can't be expanding now, because we have been expanding forever, and therefore we have already sort of expanded. That's one way of seeing that. There's nowhere to expand anymore because we're already infinite. We've already expanded. There's no way in which we could still be expanding if we are infinite already. So again, this is a scientific way of suggesting that the universe had a beginning. It had an inflationary phase, and that inflationary phase is used by Big Bang model in the way they do. But I use the inflationary phase in the way the Bible says. So inflationary phase is not against models that we could use. The second scientific argument, why are we not in a heat death already? If the universe had been around for infinite time already, then essentially um, um, the entire universe would have lost all its heat, because we have had infinite time to dissipate heat in the universe, and therefore we'd expect to find this heat, what is called the heat death. But we do heat death, and therefore nothing to exist. Heat doesn't exist, and nothing else, and so on, and therefore we wouldn't exist. But what we do find is that heat death hasn't happened. We still exist. We are merely around, and therefore we haven't been around for infinite period of time. Which again, what it says here, Aaron Wall of University of California formulated a new singularity theorem which seems to close the door on quantum gravity as a possible explanation for the disequilibrium. Wall shows, given the validity of the generalized second law of thermodynamics in quantum gravity, the universe must have begun to exist, unless one postulates a reversal of the arrow of time. Simply put, the fact that we still exist as opposed to dying forever, and I don't mean, when I say dying, I don't mean human beings alone dying, I mean the universe itself dying forever. The very fact that we still exist is a scientific argument to say, based on observations we have already, a scientific argument to say that we haven't been around for infinite period of time. Of course, I do know, and I'm aware that scientists are now trying hard, desperately, to find out if there are other observations we can make to really go away from the Big Bang theory, because Big Bang theory isn't helping in a purely naturalistic worldview. It simply isn't helping. The point is now that one is true because infinities can't exist. One is true because of some simple ways of observation, which we already spoke of. Something cannot come from nothing. And then two is true because of the four arguments we have advanced so far. Two philosophical, two scientific. One and two are true. If the universe began to exist, the universe has a cause of its beginning, number one. And point number two is the universe began to exist. One and two are true. And therefore, we can readily conclude that the universe has a cause for its beginning. All of the universe has a cause for its beginning. And from there, we can then advance on, according to Kalam cosmological argument, we can advance on arriving at the conclusion that there is a God. We can go further than just saying there is a cause for its existence, to even talking about a personal God, a sentient being who is all powerful to bring the universe into existence. The way in which we do that, in short, is something like this. The universe is such universe. What do we define as universe in the formulation that we have? Is all of known physical reality. All of known physical reality. And so any cause that the universe has, so if the universe came into existence at a particular point in time, whatever brought the universe into existence is not from the universe, because the universe didn't exist to bring itself into existence. So it's not from the universe, and therefore is immaterial, non-physical in nature, not what we would normally observe in nature. The reason for the existence of universe is beyond what we would normally call nature or what we would normally call universe. So it transcends universe itself. And of course, if we understand that the universe is all of known reality, to bring about all of known reality from the lack of all known reality is really to bring about something from nothing. If you carefully observe, to bring about all of known reality from the lack of all known reality means to bring about something from nothing. There's only one thing which still is there even in that frame of reference, and that is the transcendental cause for the existence of the universe. Apart from the transcendental cause, there's nothing from the universe which existed at that time. So something coming from nothing, what is called ex nihilo creation. From out of nothing, creation happened of the universe. And so this reason for existence, this cause for the beginning of the universe, not alone transcends the universe, but also is all powerful to bring about something from nothing in this universe. It takes enormous power. We might even say infinite power, enormous power, omnipotent. So the cause for the existence of the universe has to be really, really powerful. Not alone that, to bring about this something from nothing, this cause for existence should have conceptualized this something when there was still nothing. It had to be thought through. It had to be, it had to be thought about, at least, even if not thought through, thought about before it's brought into existence. So it has to be, the cause of existence of the universe has to be a sentient being, someone who can, an entity which can think. And using that, we can say that entity which can think is what we would normally call a sentient entity. And therefore, being able to think corresponds to being a personal entity. So we can, from saying or from calling that entity an entity, we can go on to say this is a personal being. So a personal being that transcends time and space and everything else in the universe, who is all powerful, omnipotent, to bring into existence the universe from nothing, who can think through, who can bring into existence, is the sort of reason we are looking for. And that is the sort of reason the Bible suggests. And the name given to that personal being who brings into existence something out of nothing, using immense power that he holds, is who the Bible calls God. In other words, to say that God created the universe is perfectly consistent with philosophical argumentation based on scientific observations we have today. Like I said, I know scientists are desperately trying hard to move away from the Big Bang based model, to come up with alternative explanations, so that the theory that they propose would be truly naturalistic. But again, we need to wait for their new ideas to comment on them. But the simple point is, based on ideas advanced and held by scientists so far in regards to scientific observations, we can clearly and confidently say there exists a God who brought the universe into existence. And this God, the Bible, this reason, the personal being which brought the universe into existence, the Bible calls God. And once we have come to that, arrived at that conclusion, we can also move on to the revelations that we have, to try and see if we can give specific details corresponding to that God. And of course, the Bible stands there quite tall with its reliability, and therefore we can even make further comments on this God, like saying what his name is and what kinds of things he likes and so on. So we have we could arrive there, and then in terms of the age of the universe itself, we can comment on that also. Simply put, the point is what was intended to be a naturalistic model in terms of being Big Bang, what was intended to be a naturalistic model, after all, is not naturalistic when we look at the details. It was intended to be naturalistic, but it is still not naturalistic. And scientists are desperately trying to plug the hole in that regard. What they are now trying to do is really move on to even what they call, actually seeing what happened at the time of the bang. So they want to picture, they want an evidence, they want to see figuratively what happened. And their hope is when they look at what happened during the bang, they might be able to say, actually what banged is this, and the properties of this is that, and therefore we can still say there is no God. They are hoping, but it's not science so far. So we need to wait and see the ideas that they come up with. And that's one comment. Big Bang is simply not naturalistic, even though it was intended to be. Another philosophical hole in that argument anyway is the fact that, given that we're talking about something, the universe having a beginning, the problem is they're trying to present this, what is called the black hole. What is called one of the black holes. They're trying to present one of the black holes as what resulted in the Big Bang itself. But the problem is a black hole in itself is not nothing, and black hole is part of the universe, or black holes are part of the universe, and therefore they're still not addressing how universe came into existence. They're purely talking about how something in the universe resulted in some other things in the universe, not how something came from, how the entire universe came into being from actual nothing. A black hole, many times people would pretend that it's actual nothing, but in reality it's not an actual nothing. It is an actual something with plenty of properties corresponding to it. An actual nothing would have no property associated with it. And so that's one way of approaching this area. A Big Bang is not a purely naturalistic model. A Big Bang would lead to a creator God. Once we have come to that conclusion, then essentially the God, creator God, would take over, and the Bible, in other words, the Bible would take over to then dictate terms to say, yes, you are right in that the universe should have a cause. I am the cause, and now you better shut up because you've got your facts wrong. You're right in saying universe had a beginning. You're right in even saying the universe is still expanding, but the model in which the model which captures the expansion of the universe is not in the way you see it, but in the way that I propose, and so on. Anyway, okay, that's one argument. There are a couple of other arguments. I'm just going to quickly maybe just mention the names and then make a couple of other final comments and to open the floor for questions and comments. Cosmological argument from contingency essentially is by simply asking the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is the universe there as opposed to there being nothing? Essentially, this goes on to explore the property of what the properties or the attributes of what preceded the universe. This is a way of philosophically approaching this area from contingency. What led? What is the reason for what is the reason for why things are in the way they are right now? Why is there something as opposed to nothing? What happened? What's the property of what preceded the universe? To an extent, we have this now as opposed to nothing. There is ontological argument which it's a bit deeply involved. It's again, some of these arguments would at the outset look very primitive, very simplistic, but have deep points. I'm not sure if I'd have enough time to go through the ontological argument. Again, William Lane Craig proposes some points there. I have some particular comments I think there are a couple of holes in what William Lane Craig proposes, and I've given some comments there. Please read it when you have a chance. But again, these are areas which need to be discussed in great length of detail to even get our heads around it properly. And finally, teleological argument. A teleological argument is something like a design argument, which is essentially, the universe seems to be designed. It's not, when we observe the universe, there are several things in the universe where we can clearly say, unless it had been like this, the universe wouldn't even have existed. But this thing is like this, and therefore we can expect that someone had deliberately set the properties of the universe in these particular ways. So there has been someone who has been in control doing all these things. Teleological argument. Fine-tuning of the universe is the argument is based on the fine-tuning of the universe. It's not just in the fine-tuning of the universe, but also in the explanation of how biological forms have particular designs in them and so on. So these are four main arguments, but simply put, where have we got to right now? Where we are right now is here. The Bible proposes on its own that God created. Contending with this, people wanting to make God redundant, they were challenging by attempting to propose naturalistic models. And they thought Big Bang was going to help them. And Big Bang really stands on a few different scientific observations. But those same scientific observations could support some other models also, but Big Bang was advanced. But Big Bang essentially relies upon the fact that the universe had a beginning. But the very fact that the universe had a beginning would eventually mean that that we do expect, where we do need to seek for a creator of that universe, and therefore itself, the very advance of Big Bang as a naturalistic model defeats its own purpose, and it ends up being a non-naturalistic model. And therefore, the biblical worldview, in terms of there being a creator God, is a tenable worldview, consistent with the scientific observations that we have. And the alternative worldviews are self-defeating in them being worldviews that are attempting to be naturalistic. With that, let's open the floor for questions, and questions mainly, and maybe even some quick comments. Any questions or comments?
Brother Arul.
Yes, Brother.
Hi. With speaking of these expanding systems of the universe and such, and the laws of entropy and thermodynamics, has anyone offered up any plausible counter to, from a biblical perspective, that would be, well, entropy exists, decay exists, the fact that we have to consume other life sources to top up our own energy system exists. Therefore, that would explain original sin, curse on the earth, decay, death, etc. Does anyone have any? Are you aware of any other arguments that would be counter to something like that? Because the only other alternative, and I think it was William Lane Craig that said it, so if that isn't true, then the atheistic alternative is the heat death of the universe, where literally that means nothing means anything. There's no point to life, in other words. The atheistic point would be that there's no point to life. There's going to be a heat death of the universe. Whereas the biblical narrative would be, well, there is a point to life, but what we observe is not just that there isn't a point and there's a heat death of the universe, but because of the fall of man and sin, we now have to, take life in order to, top up our own energy systems, or we will die. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the transfer of energy.
So your question is, has there been, am I aware of any sort of resource or someone who has approached this area in great detail? Are you tying in the physical argument or the argument related to the physicality with the actual theology?
Yeah.
I'm not aware. I'm not aware of any such resource. I'm
just saying,
not
because
aware.
I've never seen anyone able to answer it like that, because what we see and observe would actually fit what the Bible describes. If there was a beginning from a creator, and then we fell from that point of grace where death then entered in, sin, decay, entropy, we have a way of describing that. Whereas the only other alternative, as I said, is the atheistic explanation is the heat death of the universe, when we started at a point, Big Bang, etc. Evolution jumps forward from there, but ultimately everything means nothing with that explanation. Really, there's no point to anything really, because everything's going to die at the heat death of the universe. That's the only other alternative I've heard of that was. I wouldn't say that's a counter, but it's a very sad way to look at life, I think, anyway, like that. But I've never seen or heard anyone who's able to provide a sort of sufficient rebuttal to something like that, to say that what we observed actually follows the biblical pattern.
Yeah, I'm not aware of either. I mean, that particular argumentation to me is, yes, okay. I haven't followed William Lane Craig's that argument. But that, yeah, okay. That particular argument seems to be an argument to establish, the reason for morality, or the reason for moral behavior, as opposed to random behavior. I'm not sure if that argument has been engaged with, but I haven't extensively covered material. I haven't extensively took stock of that argument, so I'm not really sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 21 Olympus Mon says, why do you think that the scientific community clings to this idea of something from nothing? It just sounds silly. Why do I think the scientific community clings to this idea of something from nothing? I think, I mean, of course, they're getting money, they're getting paid. They need to keep, they need to get a revenue source. Now, but approaching it from I mean, if I were sort of searching or following what some of the other people are proposing as their goal in pursuing this, what they are hoping to find is this. So far the idea is there was a big bang, and from there things came. And so far the idea is that's supposed to be explaining something from nothing. But of course the problem there is the black hole is not nothing. But I think what they are really hoping now, as far as what I understand, is they're really trying to actually observe the Big Bang. And of course, bear in mind, in the way things are proposed right now, it would appear as if you can observe the Big Bang even today, because of the way in which we see how light travels and all those things. We can observe Big Bang today. And so the point is, if you can observe Big Bang today, they are hoping to find something which so far no one knows of, which then would come to their rescue in terms of saying, I am the naturalistic explanation, which you didn't think of before, but I am that one, if you see what I mean. So they're really hoping to observe something which would be entirely new, groundbreaking, in a manner of speaking, um, to really explain how the beginning could have happened. That's what they are hoping. And this is where, with the subatomic particles and so on, and the experiments that they're trying to do with the collision of some of these particles, the Large Hadron Collider experiment and so on, they are really hoping to get to that point of the bang. That's what they are trying to do. So yeah, that's their attempt at the minute. And therefore, the challenge for Christians here is, of course, as Christians, we appreciate science. Good science we appreciate all the time. I have my personal favorite areas. I'd really like to study. I'd really like to propose and explore models in which we view light, and how light behaves and so on. I'd really like to, because I think we haven't even scratched the surface even there. I'd like to do that through God's grace, which can really shape some worldviews. But anyway, they're doing what they're doing. We can do what we can do to see where things go. But what I can say, having said what we've said so far, they are pursuing for these options, but all the while they are pursuing, we can always continue to make the argument that we have other reasons, including the reason we have proposed today, other reasons to claim there exists a God. And therefore, don't be in these hot pursuits hoping you can deny God when we have all the evidence pointing to God all the way. That's the point I'd be trying to make. Okay, Brother Darren says, what's your view or response, Arul, on distant starlight being claimed evidence for old Earth creationism or evolution? So distant starlight problem, again, the point is there is an unresolved area, unresolved question of distant starlight, which is essentially the simple point that we are able to observe. We are able to observe light from entities which are far away from us, separated from us by a distance of more than, let's say, 10,000 light years. So this distant starlight problem is, well, we have got only we have so far lived for only 10,000 light years, 10,000 years, and in these 10,000 years, light can travel only 10,000 light years distance, but we observe stars which are much further away from us. And so this is at times used by some people who are not familiar with this area in deep to say, oh, there's distant starlight and therefore your 10,000 years is wrong. The problem with this is the same distant starlight problem exists even for the 13.5 billion years also, because people are saying they are observing things which are more than 13.5 billion light years away from us. But if the universe had only lived for 13.5 billion years, then you shouldn't be observing things which are more than 13.5 billion light years away. So that simply won't. In other words, that's a problem both for our biblical worldview of young Earth and Big Bang worldview of old Earth. In both cases, the problem exists, and this is why I really like to study light in more detail. It's an unresolved area. And this is where Big Bang introduces the inflationary stage at the start. The proposal is that things were together initially, and then space moved away. It is space which expanded, and therefore space can expand faster than time and so on. But the same idea could be used in the biblical worldview also, because the Bible does refer to the fact of God stretching the heavens. So whatever they can use, we can use also within the 10,000 years time frame. 21 Olympus Mon says, is it true that most early scientists were Christians? That's very true. most early scientists were Christians. And as a matter of fact, there are arguments advanced to say that okay, let's be clear. Most early modern scientists, there's also the Greeks, the Greek philosophers who have been advancing science for a very long time, even from before the time of Jesus. um, and maybe the Chinese, and maybe Indians, and all sorts of people have been exploring science for a long time. But if you're talking about modern science, the last couple of hundred sort of centuries, sort of science, a few hundred centuries, there you do see Christians being at the forefront, purely because we understand that God created, there must be order, and therefore there's plenty to study. If there is disorder, there is nothing to study. Like what Brother Aaron was saying, well, might as well give up, just get on with life and get done with it. There's nothing more to think about it. But there is order to life, and we can explore. So most early scientists were indeed Christians. I think there's a long list of people who were astronomers, people who were dealing with practical, very practical science here, like electricity and so on, studying all these things. Yeah, the Christians. Cool. Let me look at the time now. Okay. Any more questions? I think there are a couple of areas exposed here which are really my favorite areas, where God strengthening, if I do get time. My wife is sitting next to me. I'm looking at her thinking, will I get time in the years to come? But there's a couple of different areas which are really interesting areas to really explore, but they're going to be mind-boggling. Two of my favorite areas are infinity. How does true infinity look like? And next one is light, behavior of light. I'd really like to study or propose models related to them both, but I'm not sure if I'll have time. Okay, do you know of any books that detail the name of these scientists so we could know them by name? Yeah, I think multiple different books. Even the Answers in Genesis, some of the resources would talk about the early Christian scientists, I think. I'm sure there's another book which my wife is reading now. Yes. Okay, so there's another book which I don't agree with entirely, which my wife is reading now, which makes a case for the existence of God, but makes inaccurate comments about biblical worldview. But that has a short index of list of scientists who have been Christians also. But I'm sure if you access one of the Christian creation resources, I'm sure you'd find them. I mean, if you do a simple Google search of Christian scientists or something, I'm sure someone has a list somewhere.
No, this is someone sent about it.
I mean, yeah. If you look at list of Christian scientists, Wiki has a wiki page, and then a few other resources seem to pop up. Please do peruse them. Sister Sybil says, as God lives outside of time, when we say in the beginning, we already limit God. This is just a comment. Because God lives outside of time, when we say in the beginning, we already limit God. Not true. When we say okay, a couple of things we say about God in regards to the idea of beginning. One is The Bible clearly says God is the beginning and the end. He is the beginning and the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the Ancient of Days. So what we more accurately say is that beginning itself and end itself is in God. Is not outside of God, but is in God. As a matter of fact, all known reality is in God. We are living in God. I don't know if that makes much sense to you now. All of known reality has to be in God because God is infinite. And in other words, when we say God is omnipresent, the reason he is omnipresent is not because he somehow managed to exist everywhere, but that everything or everywhere actually is in him, if you see what I'm saying. So the point is, God is infinite, even in terms of time. Beginning and end are in him. What the Bible says is, in the beginning God created. So what it is what it is doing there is that it is really talking about some creative work of that God within finite time and space. In other words, the point is, an infinite God could operate within finite time and space also. When he was operating within time and space, he was the same true infinity. He wasn't entirely covered or encompassed, covered by the time and space, but he was operating within time and space. When he was operating within time and space, he was everywhere also. In other words, we're not limiting God, but we are rather talking about God within the limits of time and space when we speak of those, when we speak of some events corresponding to creation. Okay. We have 2 more minutes. And maybe what I'll do is, maybe we can wrap it up here and take half an hour break and then reconvene in half an hour. I'd like to have half an hour break because we do have a 3-hour training after that. So let's wrap it up here. Thank you very much, everyone. And of course, the final session would be on biology, our comments on evolution and that sort of stuff. Okay, see you soon.